The satellite feed flickered across 3 dozen screens in the operations center at Bagram Airfield, each one showing the same nightmare unfolding in real time. A Marine reconnaissance team, Callsign Reaper 6, had pushed too far into the Korangal Valley pursuing high-value targets. Now they were pinned in a dried riverbed with sheer rock faces on 3 sides and approximately 200 Taliban fighters closing the noose. The Marines had maybe 20 minutes before they were overrun. Every available fast mover in theater was either Winchester, out of ammunition, or grounded for maintenance. The Air Force colonel commanding the Tactical Operations Center stood with his fists pressed against the display table, watching thermal images of insurgents moving through the tree line like wolves surrounding wounded prey. His radio operator had already made the call that everyone in the room was thinking, but nobody wanted to say aloud. Start planning casualty evacuation for whatever bodies they could recover. Then a voice crackled through the speakers, calm as Sunday morning, with an accent that belonged somewhere between West Texas and the high desert of New Mexico. Bagram Control, this is Hog 17, 20 miles south of the valley, full combat load, requesting immediate tasking. The operations center went silent. Every head turned toward the speakers. The colonel's executive officer checked the air tasking order twice, then looked up with confusion stamped across his face. "Sir, that's Captain Razami. She's scheduled for a low-priority CAS patrol over Kandahar. She's not assigned to this sector." The colonel grabbed the radio handset himself. "Hog 17, Bagram Control, how did you hear about Reaper 6? There was a pause filled with the distant growl of a turbofan engine. "I didn't hear about them, sir. I heard them. Their emergency frequency lit up my receiver about 4 minutes ago. Sounded like they could use a friend." Someone in the back of the operations center muttered something about cowboy pilots and freelancing, but the colonel silenced him with a look that could strip paint. He studied the satellite feed again. The Marines had begun taking casualties. Small arms fire sparkled in the thermal imaging like deadly fireflies. The colonel made a decision that would either save lives or end a career. "Hog 17, you are cleared direct. Reaper 6 is broadcasting on emergency tactical. Make contact and provide close air support. Rules of engagement are weapons-free on any hostile forces within 1,000 meters of friendly positions." The voice came back immediately, steady and professional, with just a hint of something else underneath. Maybe determination, maybe fury held in check by training and discipline. "Copy all, Bagram. Hog 17 is inbound hot. Tell Reaper 6 that siren's coming." The Marines in the riverbed didn't know that call sign. Neither did most of the personnel in the operations center. But in certain ready rooms and squadron bars scattered across Air Force bases, the name carried weight. Razami had flown the A-10 Warthog for 7 years, accumulating more combat hours than pilots twice her age. She had earned her call sign during her first deployment, not through some embarrassing incident like most pilots, but through something that revealed character. During a mission over Helmand Province, she had stayed on station for 3 hours past Bingo Fuel, circling a surrounded army patrol, making gun runs with her GAU-8 Avenger cannon until her ammunition counter hit 0, then continuing to make dry passes. No weapons, just the psychological effect of an A-10 screaming overhead, until relief arrived. The patrol commander had radioed afterward, his voice cracking with exhaustion and gratitude. "I don't know who you are, but you sounded like a guardian angel and fought like something out of mythology." Another pilot monitoring the frequency had replied, "That's Siren. She'll sing you home or drag your enemies to hell. Your choice." But in the Tactical Operations Center at Bagram, none of that history mattered to the skeptics. A captain, even one with Madhavi's experience, was still junior. She was still flying alone, and she was still moving toward a tactical situation that would have given pause to a full squadron. The colonel's executive officer stood beside him, watching the satellite feed track the single aircraft icon moving north into the valley. "Sir, with respect, 1 A-10 against 200 fighters in complex terrain. The odds aren't good." The colonel didn't take his eyes off the screen. "Then she'll even them out. In the cockpit of Hog 17, Razami ran through her combat checklist with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this more times than she cared to count. She dropped altitude, keeping the mountains between her and the enemy, using terrain masking the way a hunter uses trees. Her A-10 Thunderbolt, ugly and beloved in equal measure, responded to her inputs with the reliability of an old friend. The aircraft was built around its gun, a 7-barrel Gatling cannon that fired 30-millimeter rounds at a rate that sounded like a demonic belch. 70 rounds per second of depleted uranium hate. She switched her radio to the emergency frequency and kept her voice level, professional, stripped of everything except competence and certainty. Reaper 6, this is Hog 17, A-10 Warthog, full combat load, 3 miles south and closing your position. I need you to mark your location and give me a target brief. The response came back immediately, breathless, punctuated by gunfire. Hog 17, Reaper 6 actual. We are 12 personnel in a dried creek bed, grid November Echo 746238, taking effective fire from north, northwest, and west. Estimate company strength enemy in tree line approximately 300 meters out and closing. We have multiple casualties, running low on ammunition. We need you to danger close everything in the wood line. Danger close. That meant dropping ordnance within 600 meters of friendly forces, well within the fragmentation radius of most weapons. It meant the Marines were desperate enough to risk dying from friendly fire, because the alternative was certain. Razat checked her stores. 2 AGM-65 Maverick missiles, 8 Mark 82 500-pound bombs, full ammunition for the GAU-8, 1,100 rounds of armor-piercing incendiary, and 2 AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles that she hoped she wouldn't need because they were designed for air-to-air combat, and seeing them on her loadout screen right now would mean something had gone catastrophically wrong. She crested the ridgeline and the valley opened before her like a stage set designed for tragedy. She could see the creek bed, the thermal signatures of the Marines in defensive positions, and the surrounding tree line alive with movement. She had seconds to make decisions that would determine whether 12 men went home or went into body bags. Reaper 6, Hog 17 has good visual on your position and the enemy concentration. Stand by for gun run, north tree line first. Keep your heads down, this will be close. She rolled the A-10 into a dive, lining up the shot with the instinct developed through thousands of practice runs and dozens of real engagements. The targeting reticle settled over the densest cluster of thermal signatures. At 1,500 feet, she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared to life, and the entire aircraft shuddered as if caught in turbulence. From the ground, the sound reached the Marines a full second after the rounds impacted, a deep tearing noise like industrial fabric ripping apart, followed by the distinctive brrrrrt that every infantryman who had ever worked with A-10s knew meant salvation was overhead. The 30-millimeter rounds chewed through the tree line like a circular saw through balsa wood. Trees exploded into splinters. Human bodies simply ceased to exist in any recognizable form. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Taliban fighters who moments before had been advancing with confidence now scrambled for cover or broke and ran. Razat pulled up hard, feeling the G-forces press her into the seat, and banked left for another pass. Her eyes scanned constantly instruments, terrain, threats, targets, friendly positions. Flying the A-10 in close air support was less like piloting and more like conducting a violent symphony where every note had to be perfect or people died. She keyed the radio again. Reaper 6, assess damage and give me next target. The Marine commander's voice came back stronger now, steadier, with the sound of hope creeping back into it. Hog 17, that was good work. Enemy breaking contact on the north side. We still have heavy concentration northwest, approximately 270 degrees from our position, 400 meters in the rocks. They have crew-served weapons, possibly RPGs. Razaz's tactical display updated with the information. The northwestern position was elevated, giving the enemy both cover and a commanding field of fire. Traditional gun runs would be risky because of the angle and the proximity to the Marines. She needed precision. She selected one of her Maverick missiles, let the seeker head acquire the target coordinates, waited for the solid tone that indicated lock and fired. The missile dropped away from the wing pylon, its rocket motor igniting a heartbeat later, and streaked toward the rocks like a falcon diving on prey. The explosion bloomed orange and black against the gray stone, and secondary detonations followed as ammunition or explosives stored in the position cooked off. Razami didn't wait to admire her work. She was already scanning for the next threat, already planning the next attack run. In the operations center at Bagram, the personnel who had been skeptical now watched in silence as the satellite feed showed the tactical situation transforming. The enemy forces that had been tightening a noose around Reaper 6 were now scattered, disorganized, caught between the need to fight and the overwhelming urge to survive. The colonel watched the single aircraft icon circle the valley like a protective angel and allowed himself the smallest hint of satisfaction. His executive officer stood beside him, no longer questioning, simply bearing witness. The next 20 minutes became a masterclass in close air support. Razami worked the valley systematically, using her cannon to suppress enemy positions, her bombs to destroy strongpoints, and her presence to deny the Taliban any chance to reorganize. She flew with mathematical precision but also with something deeper, an understanding that every round she fired, every bomb she dropped, was the difference between 12 families getting their Marines back or receiving folded flags. She talked constantly on the radio, keeping Reaper 6 informed, coordinating her attacks, ensuring that everyone knew where she was and what she was doing. Reaper 6 Hog 17 rolling in from the south with guns, targeting enemy personnel in the western tree line. 30 seconds. Reaper 6 copies all personnel taking cover. BRRRRRT. Reaper 6 assess. Good hits, enemy retreating from that position. You're breaking their will to fight, Hog 17. She allowed herself the briefest moment of satisfaction before focusing on the next task. Her fuel gauge showed she was approaching the point where she would need to consider returning to base, but she pushed that thought away. The Marines were still in danger, still surrounded, still needing her. Then her radar warning receiver screamed to life. The sharp electronic tone and the flashing lights on her threat display told her that somewhere in the valley, someone had just painted her with a targeting radar. Shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile, probably a SA-7 or something similar, definitely close enough to be a lethal threat. She reacted instantly, trained responses overriding conscious thought. She threw the A-10 into a hard turn, punched out flares that tumbled through the sky like burning flowers and dropped chaff to confuse radar guidance. The missile, if it had been fired, either missed or malfunctioned. The warning tone ceased, but the message was clear. The enemy had adapted and they were willing to trade resources to bring her down. She keyed the radio, her voice still calm despite her heart hammering in her chest. Reaper 6, Hog 17, I have SAM activity in the area. Likely mobile launcher. Did you see where that radar emission came from? The response came back immediately. Hog 17, we saw the launch. Southern Ridge, approximately 500 meters south of your last gun run. Taliban are trying to drive you off. Razami smiled inside her helmet, a cold expression that would have worried anyone who saw it. Then they picked the wrong pilot. She climbed, gaining altitude and distance, then came around in a wide arc that kept her outside the effective range of most man-portable air defense systems. She studied the terrain, looking for any hint of where the missile team might have repositioned. There, a flash of movement near an outcropping of rocks that provided both cover and a clear line of sight to the valley. She selected her second Maverick missile, locked the coordinates and fired. The missile's impact was spectacular, the explosion echoing off the valley walls like thunder. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left of the outcropping but rubble and a scorched crater. She had just eliminated not only the immediate threat, but also sent a message to any other enemy fighters considering similar actions. Shooting at her was not a viable survival strategy. The Taliban, confronted with an enemy they could not intimidate and could not escape, began to break completely. Small groups fled into the mountains, abandoning their weapons and equipment. Encirclement dissolved. The Marines of Reaper 6, who 20 minutes earlier had been preparing for a last stand, now found themselves in control of the battlefield. Razami made 2 more gun runs to ensure the enemy retreat was genuine, then climbed to a holding pattern above the valley. Her fuel was critically low now. She had maybe 15 minutes of loiter time before she had to turn for home. She switched back to the emergency frequency. Reaper 6, Hog 17. Enemy forces are routed. You have breathing room. What's your status? The Marine commander's voice came back, and for the first time since the crisis began, there was something other than desperation in it. Hog 17, Reaper 6. We have 3 urgent surgical and 2 priority casualties, but everyone is alive. We are consolidating position and preparing for CASEVAC. I don't have words for what you just did. You saved 12 lives today. Razaf felt the weight of those words settle into her chest. 12 lives. 12 human beings who would see another sunrise, would call home, would have futures. She had been trained to think in terms of targets and objectives, but moments like this reminded her why she had chosen this path. Reaper 6, just doing my job. Medical evacuation helicopters are inbound. Estimated 15 minutes to your position. I'll stay overhead until they arrive. She didn't mention that staying meant she would be flying on fumes, that she would be pushing her fuel reserves into the red zone, that landing back at base would be tight enough to make her crew chief go prematurely gray. None of that mattered compared to ensuring these Marines made it home. In the operations center at Bagram, the colonel watched the tactical display and made a decision. He turned to his radio operator. Get me aerial refueling. I want a tanker repositioned to meet Hog 17 on her return flight. She's not going to have enough fuel to make it back if she stays on station until CASEVAC arrives. The operator worked his console, coordinating with Air Mobility Command, arranging a mid-air refueling that wasn't on any schedule but was absolutely necessary. Within minutes, a KC-135 tanker was changing course, moving into position to meet the A-10 that had just changed the course of a battle. Razami orbited the valley, watching the mountains and the sky with equal attention. The sun was setting now, painting everything in shades of amber and crimson. Beautiful and terrible, the way combat often was. She thought about the men on the ground below her, thought about their families back home who had no idea how close they had come to devastating news. She thought about her own family, about the father who had immigrated from Iran with nothing but determination, and a dream of giving his children opportunities he never had, about the mother who had been quietly terrified every day of this deployment, but had never once asked her to choose safety over service. She thought about the path that had led her to this cockpit, this moment, this choice to fly into danger when she could have followed the flight plan and stayed safe. The CASEVAC helicopters arrived exactly on schedule, 2 A-60 Black Hawks flying nap of the earth through the darkening valleys. Razak coordinated with them, ensuring they had current information about threats and friendly positions. She watched them land near the Marines, watched the casualties being loaded aboard with practiced efficiency, watched the helicopters lift off and accelerate toward the nearest field hospital. Only when they were clear of the valley, when she knew that Reaper 6 was safe, did she turn south toward Bagram. Her fuel gauge showed numbers that would have been alarming under any other circumstances. She contacted the tanker that had been repositioned for her, coordinated a rendezvous point, and flew toward it with the steady focus of someone who had trained for exactly this scenario, but hoped never to need it. The aerial refueling took 12 minutes, her A-10 plugging into the drogue that trailed behind the KC-135 like an umbilical cord, fuel flowing at high pressure into her tanks. When she disconnected and the tanker peeled away, her fuel gauge showed healthy numbers again. She felt the tension that had been coiled in her shoulders for the past hour begin to ease, just slightly. The flight back to Bagram was quiet, almost meditative. The sky had gone from amber to purple to the deep indigo of near night. Stars were beginning to appear. She flew by instruments mostly, the comfort of familiar routine replacing the hypervigilance of combat. Her radio crackled, the operations center at Bagram checking in. Hog 17, Bagram Control. You are cleared direct for landing, runway 21. Ground crew is standing by. The Colonel would like to see you in operations after you land. Razami acknowledged, wondering what kind of conversation was waiting. Debriefings were standard after any combat mission, but the specific request to see the Colonel suggested something more. She pushed the thought aside and focused on the task at hand, getting her aircraft safely on the ground. The landing was textbook, smooth despite her fatigue. She taxied to the designated hardstand where her crew chief and maintenance team were waiting. As the engine spooled down and she began the shutdown checklist, she could see her crew chief climbing the ladder to the cockpit, his face split in a grin that suggested he had heard what happened. Captain Madhavi, I don't know what you've been doing out there, but half the base is talking about it. They're saying you held off an entire Taliban company by yourself. Razami pulled off her helmet, feeling the cool evening air on her sweat-damp hair. They're exaggerating. I had help. She gestured to the A-10 around her, the ugly, beautiful machine that had carried her through another day of combat. She did most of the work. The crew chief laughed. Ma'am, the aircraft is only as good as the pilot, and from what I'm hearing, you flew like a legend today. She climbed down from the cockpit, her legs slightly unsteady after hours in the seat, and looked at the A-10 with the critical eye of someone who knew what stress combat flying put on an airframe. Scorch marks around the gun port, empty weapons pylons, hydraulic fluid weeping from a connection that would need attention. But overall, her aircraft had performed flawlessly. She patted the fuselage, a gesture of affection and gratitude that might have seemed silly to someone who didn't fly, then headed toward the operations center. The building was a temporary structure, prefabricated walls and a roof that probably leaked during rain, but it was the nerve center of air operations in the region. She entered, still wearing her flight suit and carrying her helmet. The operations center was full of personnel who stopped what they were doing to watch her walk through. Some nodded, some stared. A few started clapping and then more joined until the entire room was applauding. Razami felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't comfortable with attention, had never flown for recognition or glory, but she understood what the applause meant, respect from people who understood what she had done and what it cost. The Colonel stood at the back of the room, waiting. When the applause died down, he gestured for her to follow him into a smaller briefing room. The door closed, shutting out the noise and bustle of the operations center. They were alone. The Colonel regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had commanded in combat and understood the responsibility. Captain Madhavi, what you did today was either brilliant or reckless, and I'm still deciding which. You diverted from your assigned mission, flew into a hot zone without backup, and engaged an enemy force that outnumbered you approximately 200 to 1. Razami stood at attention, prepared for whatever came next. Sir, I heard Marines in trouble and had the capability to help. I made the decision that I believed was correct given the tactical situation. The Colonel's expression didn't change. You also saved 12 lives, broke an enemy assault, and demonstrated exactly the kind of initiative and courage that we claim to value but rarely see. The Marines of Reaper 6 are alive because you made a choice to put yourself in danger. He paused and the silence stretched out. I'm not going to reprimand you, but I am going to make it clear that what you did today was extraordinary, and extraordinary actions come with extraordinary scrutiny. You'll be debriefed by intelligence, by operations, and probably by some people from higher command who want to understand exactly how one A-10 pilot accomplished what you did. Razami nodded, understanding the subtext. She had succeeded, but success didn't exempt her from the bureaucracy and analysis that followed any significant combat action. I understand, sir. The Colonel's expression softened just slightly. For what it's worth, Captain, I would have made the same call you did. Sometimes the right tactical decision is also the right moral decision. Dismissed. She saluted, he returned it, and she left the briefing room feeling the weight of exhaustion finally beginning to catch up with her. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the mission was fading, leaving behind the heavy fatigue that came after intense stress. She made her way to the pilot's quarters, a series of containerized housing units that were functional if not comfortable. Her roommate, another A-10 pilot named Kowalski, was waiting with a cup of coffee and a knowing look. "Heard you had an interesting day, Siren." Razat took the coffee gratefully, the heat of the cup warming her hands. "You could say that." Kowalski leaned back against the wall, studying her friend. "They're already talking about putting you in for a medal, Silver Star, maybe Distinguished Flying Cross. The story is spreading. Marine captain on the ground is telling everyone who will listen that you're the reason his team is alive." Razaz sipped her coffee and thought about medals and recognition, about how none of that had been in her mind when she heard the desperate radio call from Reaper 6. "I just did what anyone would have done." Kowalski shook her head. "No, Razaz, you did what you would have done. There's a difference." They sat in silence for a while, the comfortable quiet of people who understood each other and the profession they had chosen. Outside, the sounds of the airbase continued. Aircraft landing and taking off, vehicles moving, the constant rhythm of military operations that never really stopped. Razak closed her eyes just for a moment, and in that darkness she saw the valley again, saw the thermal images of the Marines surrounded, saw the tree line erupting under her guns. She saw all of it with the clarity that comes after combat when the brain processes everything that happened too fast to fully comprehend in the moment. She opened her eyes and found Kowalski watching her with concern. "You okay?" Razak considered the question. Was she okay? She had just flown one of the most intense missions of her career. She had made decisions that determined whether people lived or died. She had been shot at, had been targeted by missiles, had pushed herself and her aircraft to the edge of their capabilities. "Yeah," she said finally, "I'm okay." And she was, because this was what she had trained for, what she had prepared for, what she had chosen. The path that had led her to that cockpit, to that valley, to that moment of decision, was one she would walk again without hesitation. The next morning, Razaa was summoned to a different kind of briefing. Not operations or intelligence, but a conference room in the main headquarters building where officers from various commands had gathered. She recognized some faces: her squadron commander, the operations colonel from yesterday, a few others she had seen around the base. But there were also people she didn't know, wearing ranks that suggested they had flown in specifically for this meeting. She sat at the indicated chair and waited. A brigadier general, Silver Star gleaming on his collar, stood at the head of the table. He looked at her with an expression that might have been assessment or might have been respect. She couldn't tell which. "Captain Madhavi, thank you for joining us. We've been reviewing the tactical situation from yesterday, including gun camera footage from your aircraft, communications logs, and testimony from the Marines you assisted." He paused, and Razaf felt the weight of multiple high-ranking officers focusing their attention on her. "What we're trying to understand is the decision-making process that led you to divert from your assigned mission and engage in close air support without prior authorization or backup. Walk us through your thinking." Razat took a breath, organizing her thoughts. This was not about defending her actions. The results spoke for themselves, but about explaining the calculus that happened in those crucial moments. "Sir, I was en route to my assigned patrol area when I monitored an emergency broadcast on the tactical frequency. The transmission was from a Marine unit in contact, requesting immediate close air support. I checked the air tasking order and saw no assigned assets for that sector." She paused, remembering the sound of that voice, the controlled desperation, the background noise of gunfire. "I made the assessment that I had the capability, the ordnance, and the position to provide support. The alternative was to continue to my assigned area, which was low priority, while Marines died in a valley 20 miles away." The general nodded, making a note on the tablet in front of him. "You understood that engaging without proper coordination put you at risk, that flying solo into a complex combat environment against significant enemy forces violated standard protocols for close air support." Razam met his eyes directly. "Yes, sir. I understood the risks and the protocol violations. I also understood that following protocol precisely would mean arriving too late. I made a command decision based on the tactical reality in front of me." Another officer, A colonel she didn't recognize spoke up. "Captain, some might argue that your decision was influenced by personal factors. Your call sign, siren, comes from a previous incident where you exceeded mission parameters to support ground forces. Do you have a pattern of taking unnecessary risks?" The question hung in the air, and Razam understood what was really being asked. Was she a maverick who couldn't follow orders, or was she a skilled pilot who knew when rules needed to be bent for the greater good? She chose her words carefully. "Sir, I don't believe I take unnecessary risks. Every combat mission carries inherent risk. What I do is calculate whether the risk is justified by the potential outcome. Yesterday, the potential outcome was 12 Marines going home to their families. In my assessment, that justified the risk to one pilot and one aircraft." The general leaned back in his chair, exchanging glances with the other officers in the room. "Captain Mahdavi, we're not here to second-guess your decisions. The tactical outcome speaks clearly. You saved lives and disrupted enemy operations. What we're trying to understand is whether your decision-making process is replicable, whether it's something we can incorporate into training and doctrine, or whether it's simply an individual judgment call that worked out this time." Razat thought about that, about the difference between instinct and training, between following procedures and adapting to reality. "Sir, I believe it's both. My training gave me the skills to execute the mission. My experience gave me the judgment to know when to deviate from standard procedures. But ultimately, combat situations require individual pilots to make decisions based on incomplete information and time pressure." The debriefing continued for another hour, covering every aspect of the mission: her weapons employment, her coordination with the ground forces, her fuel management, her responses to threats. They examined her gun camera footage frame by frame, analyzed her radio communications, and reconstructed the tactical timeline. Through it all, Razat answered questions honestly, explaining her thinking without embellishment or false modesty. When it finally concluded, the general stood and extended his hand. "Captain, your actions yesterday exemplified the best traditions of Air Force combat aviation. You will be formally recognized for your courage and skill. But beyond that, your mission is going to be studied, analyzed, and used as a teaching example. You've contributed to our understanding of close air support in complex terrain." Razaz shook his hand, feeling the weight of what he was saying. Her mission wasn't just about yesterday anymore. It was becoming part of the institutional knowledge, part of the lessons learned that would be passed on to other pilots facing similar decisions. Days turned into weeks, and the story of the mission spread beyond the immediate base. It traveled through military networks, appeared in classified after-action reports, and eventually found its way into conversations in Pentagon briefing rooms. The details varied depending on who was telling it, but the core remained the same: one pilot, one A-10, 200 enemy fighters, 12 lives saved. For Razam, life returned to the rhythm of deployment. She flew her assigned missions, maintained her currency in various weapons systems, and participated in the endless briefings and planning sessions that characterized combat operations. But something had shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Other pilots treated her differently now, with a respect that went beyond mere courtesy. Ground commanders specifically requested her when close air support was needed. Even the maintenance crews, already dedicated to keeping their aircraft flying, took extra care with Hawk 17, as if the machine itself had earned special status through its performance that day. She tried to deflect the attention, uncomfortable with being singled out. In her mind, she had simply done her job. But Kowalski, her roommate and friend, wouldn't let her minimize it. "Razam, you need to understand something. What you did wasn't normal. It wasn't just competence or following training. You made a choice that most pilots would have hesitated on, and you executed it perfectly. That means something to people." They were sitting outside their housing unit, watching the sun set over the mountains that ringed the airbase, the same mountains that held valleys where people fought and died every day. Razak considered her friend's words. "I don't want to be some kind of poster child for heroism. I just want to fly, do good work, and help people when I can." Kowalski smiled. Too late for that. You're already becoming a legend whether you want it or not. The question is what you do with it. Before Razak could respond, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from her squadron commander. Conference room 800 tomorrow. Bring dress uniform. Dress uniform meant something formal was happening. She wondered what was coming next. The next morning, she arrived at the conference room to find it filled with personnel from across the base. Her squadron was there, along with representatives from various other units. At the front of the room stood the base commander, a one-star general she had seen only from a distance before. When everyone was assembled, the general called the room to attention. "We are here to recognize exceptional performance in combat. Captain Razami, front and center." Razam walked to the front of the room, her heart beating faster despite her effort to remain calm. The general held a small case, and when he opened it, she saw the distinctive Silver Star medal inside. Captain Madhavi, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States, for single-handedly engaging a numerically superior enemy force, and for directly saving the lives of 12 United States Marines, you are hereby awarded the Silver Star. The room erupted in applause. The general pinned the medal to her dress uniform, then stepped back and saluted. Razak returned the salute, her mind struggling to process what was happening. The Silver Star was the third highest military decoration for valor. It was given for gallantry in action, for doing something beyond the call of duty. She had never expected this level of recognition. After the ceremony, as people filed past to offer congratulations, she found herself standing with the base commander. He spoke quietly, his voice meant only for her. "Captain, you should know that the Marine commander you supported, Captain James Morrison, wrote a recommendation for this award the day after you saved his team. He said, and I quote, 'Captain Madhavi displayed such exceptional courage and skill that my entire team owes their lives to her actions. She deserves the highest recognition our nation can provide.'" The general paused, studying her face. Morrison also said something else. He said that when he heard your voice on the radio when you told him you were coming, he felt hope for the first time since the firefight started. "That's powerful, Captain. That's what we're supposed to do, give hope to people in desperate situations." Razak felt emotion tighten her throat. She had focused on the tactical aspects of the mission, on the weapons employment and the coordination. She hadn't fully considered the psychological impact, the way her presence had changed the mental state of the Marines on the ground. "Sir, I appreciate the recognition, but I was just doing what any pilot would have done." The general shook his head. "No, Captain, you did what you would have done, and that's what makes the difference." The ceremony concluded, and Razak was released to return to her duties. But as she changed back into her flight suit, preparing for that day's mission, she looked at the Silver Star now attached to her dress uniform and thought about what it represented. Not just her actions on one day, but the cumulative effect of all the training, all the choices, all the moments that had prepared her for that valley in Korangal. She thought about her father, who had come to America with nothing and built a life through determination and hard work. She thought about her mother, who had encouraged her to pursue her dreams even when those dreams involved flying combat aircraft into danger. She thought about all the instructors and mentors who had seen potential in her and helped develop it.